This is Don't Get Me Started. This is a conversation about advertising. And here is your host, freelance creative director and creative circus department head, Dan Balser.
All right, yes, welcome back to another episode of the show. Still doing this on the internet. I am wearing a headset, staring at a screen of my guest who is 3,217 miles away in a hotel in Santa Monica. And, there will be technical glitches. Hopefully there won't be a lot of background noise. I love the fact that Nathalie actually has headphones on. So the other end of this conversation is not hearing my voice twice. So Nathalie, first of all, before we get into the conversation, I want to give some thanks to Lisa Maskey. Is that her name? Lisa Maskey, right? Raven PR, who connected us. And I don't think I've told Nathalie this part, but I get these requests from PR people pitching people to be on the podcast, right? And a lot of them have clearly never listened to this podcast because they're talking about, I have a client who has a new data analytics platform that I think your listeners would love to hear about. I'm like, I don't think my listeners want to hear about analytics platforms at all. So I went and I listened to Nathalie on Nathalie Kim's podcast on We Are Next. By the way, listeners, if you're not following We Are Next and you're not keyed into Nathalie Kim's project at We Are Next, you're missing out on a trove of great advice, sage advice from someone who I cannot wait to talk to on this podcast, but that's another story. So I listened to you, Nathalie, on that one. And I also contacted Liz Cartwright. And I said to Liz, this name came to me. Do you think she'd be interesting to talk to? So Liz is I think she's creative director at Giant Spoon. Yeah. And Liz immediately replied back, yes, absolutely. She's great. So that was really cool. So for those of you who don't know the name of Nathalie Kahn, Vice President, Strategy Director at Giant Spoon. Giant Spoon is an agency, great agency in LA and New York. Nathalie, I'm going to read this a little bit off of the LinkedIn. Idea-centric strategist with a scrappy startup mentality, driven by solving real problems with unexpected solutions and making it into reality. And this is the cool part. Business Insider's Madison Avenue Rising Star, a Forbes 30 under 30, Adweek Rising Star, a failed startup founder, which I love that you put in there. I love the fact that you're going to take yourself down a tiny bit. Keep it real, right? Also, Reading Rainbow Writing Contest winner, 1996. Client experience includes Uber, NBC, Adobe, Honda, Old Navy, Facebook, Pinterest, HP, Warner Brothers, Sony, Netflix, Absolute Elix. I got to tell us, is that a drink?
Yeah, Absolute Elix. Oh,
Elix.
You gotta try it.
I will try it.
It's so good.
She is at Giant Spoon, where she has been now for over 7 years. Prior to that, she spent time at Oh Loud. I think that must have been your startup, right?
It was my failed startup, Oh Loud.
I want to talk about that in a second. Oh Loud and RPA prior to that, TBWA Shy Day, did some work with Tiger Woods Foundation, National Festival for Talented Youth, and graduated from Chapman University with a BA in PR and advertising. And thank you, Nathalie, so much for agreeing to talk with me. I'm super excited to talk again. You and I had a conversation a little while ago about this. Welcome to Don't Get Me Started.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so glad, for people who are seeing the thumbnail right now, we're both wearing orange.
Yeah, we're both wearing orange.
I feel like we're on the same wavelength here.
Mm-hmm. I think that says something. I don't know what that means. It's interesting. We had a person speak at school recently who's a color expert and actually has predicted the last 5 Pantone colors of the year. And she could tell you why we're wearing orange. She would know. There's something about hope and light, and there's something about doors opening, I think, probably. And maybe we're subliminally, we're unaware of why we make these decisions, but we're making them based on some sort of force that the strings are attached to us by someone. We're just puppets in some bigger plan. All right. So questions. Let's start the conversation. So I want to hit 2 things first off the bat. One is I want you, and part of this is going to be a little bit redundant from if anyone's listened to you on We Are Next. Some of these bits might be a little redundant, but I think they're super profound and really important. This may be a combination question, and it might be 2 separate questions, but I want to know, when did you realize that you're a strategist at heart? Yeah. And the other part of the question is, I want to talk a little bit about, and this is something that probably starts when one is young, but also continues into one's professional career, the phenomenon of the imposter syndrome. So whichever one of those you'd rather attack first, let's pick one of those and go with it.
Oh man. Well, I'm glad I haven't listened to the We Are Next podcast in a while. So hopefully I've grown, since then, and maybe I'll have different answers, but maybe not.
Probably.
Yeah, I think for the first question, ever since I was little, I was a collector of observations, of, I don't know, judgment. My parents always said I was a very judging, considered person. And I loved putting what was in my head onto paper. I thought I wanted to be a magazine editor at one point. And so I had these, what I called red books, where I would write down what's in, what's not. I would pretend my friends were celebrities, almost creating mini personas for them. I would kind of track trends over time, what shows were in and whatnot. And
You started when you were how old?
oh gosh, I must have been
7?
like six, yeah. 5. I wrote, mini stories. But I think that creativity plus the analytical, even though it wasn't, numbers and whatnot, but it was definitely just looking at the world and culture around me and being able to display that in some way. And so I didn't know when I was 7 that a strategist position existed. But I knew that I wanted to do something that was both creative and thoughtful. And so, as I went to school and I was also a dabbler, I wanted to do everything. I think I went to every single camp there was, from tennis camp, cheer camp, band camp, soccer camp, church camp, all of those things. And I just like to experience things and collect things, very much a generalist. And so by the time I got into college and I met my people, which were advertising people, I was like, there's so many people who are out there that are like me, that are creative and interesting and curious and want to do something about it. And so by the time I joined NSAC, which is the National Student Advertising Competition, brought to you by AAF, I found out that there was a role for strategy, where it was about understanding people, understanding influence, understanding what's cool, and really programming your brand into that culture. And so I've been doing it, as a kid, but as an adult and being paid for it, it's pretty awesome. Every time I take a second and I'm like, I am being paid to watch TV and analyze it. I am being paid to understand what NFTs are. I'm being paid to, read Us Weekly. Like, that's pretty cool.
I was going to ask, does the job actually allow you to scratch those itches? And it sounds like it does, right?
Yeah. And I think that's something that specifically drove me to strategy, and especially to Giant Spoon, is that you have to become an instant expert and you have to become obsessed. You have to become obsessed with different audiences and cultures, and it's not always going to be the same. So like one of the clients that I work on is training data scientists. I know nothing about data science, but I have to learn. And you learn all about like Kaggle competitions and these people who are taking all their Amazon data and tracking, how do my orders and the amount I'm spending over time correlate with Amazon stocks? Like, is there a correlation? I'm just like, that's so cool. They think so differently than me. And that to me is really, really fun.
It's amazing. It's amazing as an advertising professional to be allowed into entire subcultures that you didn't even know were there, right? And you get to like dive into them, and you can observe as an outsider, but you also have to, at a certain point, buy into it enough to be able to speak to it and understand it from the inside out, which is really kind of thrilling. And the cool thing about that is that next year it might be something else, right? That's, to me, the coolest thing. And early on in my career, we didn't have your role in every agency. So a lot of that was falling onto us to kind of like read trade books and kind of get into like asking why all the time. And I think that's sort of the essence of it, right? And it's really cool that you found that. And the reason I asked the question of when did you know it, because I just don't know how many jobs people know our jobs, right? They don't know that you didn't know that when you were 7 years old, right?
No. I mean, I knew someone made ads, I guess. I mean, and a lot of people don't know that there's these jobs specifically within advertising, like art buying or, production or producing. I think they think, and in a lot of colleges too, they teach there are people who write commercials, and that's it. And you're
Right.
like, okay, but there's so many steps and there's so many people. It's a whole orchestra of people who are trying to get something out. And once you kind of dive into it and figure out, oh, how does my brain work? What am I naturally good at? You can kind of parse out, is account for me, is creative for me, even within creative, is it design or animation or writing or whatnot? And that's really fun when people can kind of figure out like what is their calling in different spaces.
So it sounds to me like you love what you do. It sounds to me like you really it excites you to kind of dig in and ask why, right? So this is maybe a little off. This is more about you, but what in today's culture makes you wonder why, and how does your curiosity sort of reveal itself, right? So how does it come out? And like, because in a way, speaking my own personal kind of like almost debilitating curiosity, is that it kind of like it. If I see something I don't understand, it gnaws at me till I can understand it, right? So is there anything like that like in your own personal life that kind of like you've experienced as sort of like, wait, what's happening? Like, why do I not understand that? And do you always attack it to try to figure it out?
Yeah. I mean, this is really personal. So I'm 22 weeks pregnant right now.
Oh, wow.
And I'm working on a couple of clients where the audience are young parents, so it's very fit. And there's a lot that I'm learning. You just don't know. Are you a parent?
I am
You said you
twice.
have kids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just so much that you don't know until you're going through it and you're reading the books and whatnot. But there's this really interesting, I don't even call it a trend, but something I've been noticing more. And I don't know if it's the Joshua Tree effect, where I'm just, now that it's in my head, I see it everywhere. But this Mother's Day was really, really interesting because I think it was Parachute and Etsy came out and said, if you don't want Mother's Day messaging, like you can opt out. And I thought that was so cool because, a lot of these holidays are pretty triggering for people.
Well, yeah, for people who are alone and for people who have had miscarriages, that's the one thing you don't realize, the unbelievably overwhelming numbers of women who have miscarriages, which is absolutely a normal thing that happens, but isn't discussed. So it's thought of as like this horrible thing, which it is not a wonderful thing, but it's not an unusual curse.
Yeah. I mean, it happens to so many people, and it's something that I'm continuously worried about, all the time about, miscarrying, and that is a thing that happens. But I was reading this article that was about programmatic targeting and ads, and how, you click on one image of a baby crib or diapers, and all of a sudden you have been targeted as someone who is is in the mom market, which is, a very big, exciting,
Lucrative.
Purse-driven group. And you are now targeted as a mother. And what happens when you miscarry? There's no opt-out. And you are still getting baby ads. You're still getting, cribs and nursing information and advice. And it's really tough. There is no opt-out of the internet. Your digital footprint continues.
It's an incredibly empathetic option for Etsy and Parachute to do that. It's a really insightful solution.
Yeah. And it started making me think about, as marketers, there's a lot that we can do to, kind of hack the system, get in front of the right people, use data and analytics to kind of insert ourselves. But I think, and I want to fact check this, but I think in the article they were talking about with Pinterest, because Pinterest is notorious for, you clicked on a home DIY, let me give you everything that's home DIY, or
for sure,
or wedding things. And I think they call it like the miscarriage clause, or there is something like that, but they use the term miscarriage, and they're like, it's so few that like it doesn't bother us. And I'm like, there is actually a lot of people who probably
Yeah,
are.
it's not that few. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing that you just said is the word hack. So hack means that you leverage technology, adopt it, use it your own, twist it to your own needs. Hack also is what you do when you're using a blunt instrument. You're hacking through the woods with a fucking machete rather than scissors. And I find it to be so, the algorithms and decisions and the things that feed us, and this is me going off on a fucking tangent. I'm sorry.
Go off.
I'm on Instagram the other day, and I don't go on Instagram that often. I stopped using social media during the election cycle. I couldn't go on social media, period. And I'm slowly coming back in, opening the window and coming back in. So I stopped on this really cool video that shows, it looked very TikTok like, because it had a young woman like dancing next to this big wall of a building, and she reaches across the building and she looks back and she says, "Oh, let's go for it." So she jumps in front of this building, and as she jumps in front of the building, her body becomes animated. So she's doing this really cool dance that someone had animated her, and then when she jumps on the other side of the building, she's back to being a human again. Really cool. But since I stopped on that for 15 seconds, every other thing in my feed was animation. And I'm like, I don't want more animation because I stopped on that animation. Why aren't you showing me something radically new? And my call for anyone listening to this is you be the one to go out there and hack these algorithms to actually allow people to be curious rather than feeding people seconds and thirds and fourths of ice cream. Like, I don't want more ice cream. I've had it. It was really good. Can I have a pickle? So whatever that analogy is, that bothers me. So thank you for sitting through that and indulging my rant.
Yeah, no, I think it's so interesting. I mean, TikTok especially, everyone that I've talked to about it, they have their TikTok personality. Like, what are the things that you're served up? And my husband, he gets woodworking TikToks. Like, that is his TikToks. It's all woodworking, and he enjoys it and it's fun and whatnot. And mine is very different. But you're right. I mean, it does create sometimes these artificial bubbles where you're like, I want novelty, or I want to be exposed to something new. And so how do you ensure that you're doing that?
That should be the button. It's the curiosity novelty button. Turn that on. You're gonna get fed stuff you never would have expected.
Yeah.
All right, so let's switch gears. Oh, you didn't do the imposter syndrome. So do you want to talk about that? You like sighed a little bit.
No, I mean, I keep going back and forth on it because it's something that, I don't know. I think if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're somewhat delusional. And then at the same time, I think it's really harmful. And it's something that a lot of, obviously, people go through. But it's something that I've struggled with. I think you're constantly thinking, am I worth it? Am I like, why am I at this place where I am? And I think especially someone like me who, I'm almost 32, but I have a lot of responsibilities that I probably shouldn't have, or that I've grown into. But then there are times where I have to just list out my accomplishments and say, like, fuck, I did that. Like I did do that. I should be proud of these things. And by me constantly being like, oh no, like I didn't do those things, like it's really harmful for the people who are maybe watching my career. I don't know, that sounds really egotistical.
No, it's on point. And the thing that you said 3 years ago when you talked to Nathalie was that you felt like you were given a seat at the table because you're an Asian woman, right? And like you didn't earn it. It wasn't because of your own accomplishments or your own capability or competence. It was that you were given this role and you didn't deserve it. But it's a very difficult thing for people to feel like they cheated their way in, or they were a token or whatever. And the thing that you said, and I'm sorry to steal your thunder, but what you said was like, if you don't grab that, you don't bring your shit, your A game, then you have tokenized yourself. Then you've made yourself just a face at the table for looks, right? Yeah. So I think that's a really important thing that I think people need to hear.
Yeah. And thank you, Nancy Hill, for telling that to me. That was the advice she gave to me. And it's something that you constantly have to tell yourself, no matter what stage you're in, is why are you focusing on the things you're focusing on when you should be focusing on seizing the opportunity that's in front of you?
That's awesome.
And it's tough, especially in today's day and age where everyone has time to overthink everything. It's just like, get over that part. Like, what are you doing now? What impact can you make? And go from there.
I saw a really interesting quote yesterday that said, worrying is using your imagination to create something you don't want.
Yeah.
That's cool, right? All right. So let's switch gears completely radically. All right. So you're at a great agency. You collaborate. It's a really interesting role that I've always been very attracted to that role for myself. In fact, to be a strategist, because a lot of what you were saying, I'm sure resonates with a lot of listeners, totally resonates with me. Like just being obsessive about wondering why things are and like kind of finding out, learning about different cultures or different business cultures, whatever culture is defined by. You do work obviously with clients, you're working with account managers, you're working with creatives. For the creatives that are listening to this or going into agencies, what do you expect from a creative team? What makes the collaboration between you and that professional relationship work the best?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is equal amounts of enthusiasm and curiosity. I love a team that can see the potential in a project. Not every project's going to be so exciting, but if you can see the potential either for your own personal growth or, hey, this client has the opportunity to change culture, society, whatever it is, like do whatever you need to do to get yourself excited and then bring that enthusiasm to this partnership. And that means diving into the brief with me, like asking questions, not holding yourself away until you have some sort of grand reveal.
Right.
When someone gives you material, look through it, breathe it, like try to get in the heads of the audience. I think what's really tough, especially at an agency like Giant Spoon, where, a lot of the things that we're known for are, first ever, like VR cardboard headset, stuff that's really, really cool. But I think people come in and they're like, I need to bring big, buzzy ideas. And I'm like, yes, but like, we always need to tether it to like, why does this matter for the business problem and why does this matter for the audience?
All right, nice cart. Where's the horse? Like, okay, you had this really cool seat for your cart, but how are we getting there? Like, why?
Yeah, and I'm here to help you substantiate your ideas. So like, let's talk through your ideas. Like, let's figure out how do we put some meat behind the thing that is exciting you in your brain. And I think that if we can work together, like we can collectively put something in front of the client that's not only a really cool thing that maybe surprises them, but it's something that works and something that's right. And I think that's the hardest thing is a lot of creatives come in, they're like, I just read this really cool article about, so-and-so technology or emerging platform, and here's an idea, but there's no tether to it. There's no why behind it. And
I wouldn't call that right. I wouldn't call that an idea. I would call that a thing. So like how early on and is there an opportunity for writers, art directors, designers, other creatives to like be involved in your initial input stuff, like whether it's research or focus group or whatever? I mean, because for me as a professional writer, when I was in New York, the times that I got to go to focus groups, watching the people handle the product or talking about their lives was like so eye-opening for me. I hated obviously creative testing. I didn't want to go to the focus groups when they're looking at the work, but the initial insight gathering part of it, is there an opportunity for that for them? And do you find that creatives you've worked with at all your agencies are eager to do that? Or how does the relationship work personally between you and creatives in that sense?
Yeah. I mean, my thing is like the earlier we can bring people in, the better. If you can hear it directly from the clients, so be it. I know that obviously then I get my hand slapped for, hey, scope, time, not everyone can be on everything. We're not,
right, sure.
A 5-year-old soccer team swarming everywhere. But at least if a creative director or whoever is the creative lead can be involved from the very beginning, I think that's so important. I like to think of a process as almost like a breathing organism where there's moments where we come together, there's moments where we have peace and time to think on our own and then come back together. And I think that this is something we do if we had the luxury of time, and sometimes we do, but at Giant Spoon, we like these things called curiosity rallies, where we get a project that comes in and I'm like, okay, who's the core team that's working on this? Like, let's get them all in a room together and let's just talk through it. And let's talk about things that spark in your mind, whether it's an experience that you had or a story you heard or something you read or a movie or a documentary. And it gives you all these really great little rabbit holes from everyone's minds. And then strategy can go off, do their thing, do more research, kind of test out those hypotheses, and then regroup with the creative director and say like, hey, here's something that I'm really excited about, or here's a breakthrough that I had. What do you think? Is there enough there? And then, as you're brief writing, it's so important to make sure that the creative director is on board and is excited about the direction, and getting their buy-in and almost having them, when you're presenting that to the client, I think shows a lot of teamwork and, hey, as an agency, we're all behind this direction. And so I just try to find ways organically where we can work together so it feels like it's not these department silos and handoffs, but more, hey, there's a collective team that's working towards something, that's excited about something. There's a leadership team that is fully on board and invested and understands what we're trying to do. So as things kind of go apart, as they naturally do after a briefing process, we all kind of have that similar like North Star in mind of the vision of where we're going.
Right. You mean when people go their own ways to do what they do, you have this sort of anchor that everybody's kind of connected to. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that it doesn't feel like, well, this is the ownership of the strategist, or this is the ownership of creative. Like, this is a team effort to put the right ideas in front of the client. And I love at Giant Spoon, there's so many different departments and different team structures where sometimes I'm working with content and social or media and creative. And when we can actually come together and figure out what is the best way to go to market, and sometimes it's led by a media idea, sometimes it's led by a creative idea or a social idea, but can we all rally around this because we think it's the best foot forward for the problem and for your audience? It doesn't always happen that way,
yeah.
but that's the ideal.
No, that's cool. So listeners, you'll love the fact that like, if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, if you're not, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Secondly, if you're a longtime listener, you know that I have a tendency to interrupt. I will interrupt people in the middle of their thought. And I've gotten, now that we're in COVID or whatever, I'm writing stuff down. I actually have some things to follow up on. So first of all, I love the fact that and listeners will also know that I love that you referenced soccer and youth soccer, which we call swarm ball, which is everybody attacking the thing with no order, no structure, no roles that are understood so that the team can work together. That's a great analogy for sort of just like a complete cluster. And I am also relieved to hear that the way that I'm teaching this, I have this question written out that I think you're kind of answering. And that is like at the circus, at the creative circus, students are writing their own briefs, right? And the thing that I've told them to do, which I'm so happy to hear you say, is like, just sit down and talk about that target's life and the problems they have, and like anything related secondarily and tertiary to the product. It's not just about how you talk about the thing or what the thing does. It's about how it fits in people's lives, and lives are a bigger thing. So where do you philosophically and practically believe that a great brief begins? Like, what's the seed that holds the DNA of the plant that's going to grow and bear fruit? Like, where does it really begin?
Oh, it's tough. So I think there's two minds. There's starting with the audience or starting with the brand. And it's hard to pick one or the other. And I think my biggest aha moments have started with, what is the culture of the brand? What is truly authentic about the brand and what they do and why they exist? And I think it's really tough. I've gone back and forth. And then if you start with the audience, you can come up with some really cool insights about who they are. And I do think that's important. But sometimes where that leads you is creating some pretty inauthentic, pretty weak links back to the brands. And that's where you can
Wait, what do you mean weak links that can't be supported, or because it's not necessarily true for what the product is and does? Or is it a weak link because it's so creatively expressing an insight that you've lost the brand's message in it?
I think both. I think that the former is tends to be the issue where it just feels like we can't really back it up.
Right.
And I think that leads to the latter, which is if you can't back it up, then it becomes this vague thing that pretty much anybody can own.
It's like it's like the infamous Norwegian Cruise Lines ads that where people sued them because the ads were better than the experience. Seriously.
Yeah, it's tough. So like something that we say a lot is culture in, culture out. So what's the culture inside? Really understanding, the people behind products, the engineers, what the founder story, why something was built. And then looking at your audience and figuring out what are their needs, where do we fit in their lives, how do we create culture for them that's valuable. And I think if you can really bridge those two things together, like that's where the magic happens. But as of right now, I'm in the camp of starting with really, truly understanding the brand and what makes it unique and interesting and what they have to offer.
Yeah, that's really cool. Really, really cool. All right. So can we shift completely again?
Yeah, let's shift.
We're shifting. So we read your resume earlier, and you've been in the same place for a long time. Advertising Speaks, 7 years, 2 months. That's impressive. What were the impetuses, or what were the things that basically pushed you from one place to another? Was it? I can't even want to predict what it would be, but I want to talk about how, as a professional advertising person, you make the decision to switch and move. Talk a little bit about your own career trajectory.
Yeah. So it's funny. I would say Shy, it was probably my first ad agency experience, although I learned a lot at the Tiger Woods Foundation. That was actually during the time when Tiger's infamous scandal broke out. I was working at that tournament and learned a lot about crisis management. The people there are wonderful, by the way. But at Shy, I knew I wanted to get a good agency on my resume. I think Shy, is one of those that you see it and as someone who might recruit you, they can kind of assume, okay, if you worked here, you kind of have these sort of skills.
It's a credential. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I really wanted to go into strategy. And I think I was talking with the HR person at the time, and they said, we only get strategists from VCU or, people who have masters. And I said, please. So I was like, give me something else then, and I'll make it work. And they said, what about account? And I said, sure, whatever, I'll do it. I knew I was an account person. I'm way not organized enough. And so I did account, and I just snuck my way into strategy projects. I helped, coordinate focus groups. I worked with the intelligence team. I did everything I could to get the right bullet points on my resume to say, hey, I can do strategy. But
so
with
great.
Giant.
I started as an account person who got snuck into creative projects and got it here and there. I still had to go to ad school, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you do what you got to do. And then I got an internship in strategy finally at RPA, and then that grew into a full-time position, and I loved it there. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about RPA. It was a really wonderful place to just put in the reps, especially on a team like Honda. I was on the Honda national team, and for such a big account, there were only 3 strategists. It was for the Civic campaign, the CRV campaign, the NHL partnership campaign, which is great. As a strategist, I see your eyes light up because I know you're a big hockey fan.
What was until they gleefully moved my team to Canada. F those MFs. Okay.
But it was, as a junior strategist, just being able to get reps. And I think that's so important. I think anyone, if you're a creative, if you're a strategist account, it's go somewhere where you can just put a lot of reps in. And being able to do that. And also, as I got more confident in my brief writing and my research and my insights and working with my boss, then I could start creatively tweaking things and finding my own voice, finding, how I can work with creatives and getting them to trust me. And after doing that for a couple of years, I looked around and I was like, okay, do I want to work on anything else here? like, have I reached what I wanted to get out of this place? And beyond just getting the reps in, I made a lot of really great friends. I found my cohort, which I think is the most important thing. If anyone takes anything away from this podcast, I think finding your cohort is the only thing that will keep you sane through it.
And you have relationships with them still, right?
Yeah. Oh, of course. Every single one of them. I mean, we go on vacations together. We go to each other's weddings. I married one. And so.
Oh, you married one. Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
You met your husband.
Very tethered. So it's.
So why leave there? So why would you leave there?
Yeah. So I think for me, and this is something that I would tell people when they're thinking about leaving is, you kind of have to think about, where you are in your career and what you want to do next. And, there's three things. There's one is, will they pay you well, or will they pay you what you want? The second thing is, does it give you the work that's interesting, that can push you and grow you in ways that you want to? And then third is, what's your life look like outside of work? Do you have time for friends? Do you have time for family? I think we put so much emphasis on culture, like company culture. And I think the best company culture is when you can have culture outside of work.
Can you ask that when you're young? I mean, do you have the right to have that expectation when you're younger? Or is that something that comes with like earning your way to that being part of the decision?
I think you have to put those expectations on yourself. But I think the important thing is you need two of the three, where you're not going to get all three unless it's wonderful and perfect. But at least
say the three again. Life balance.
So life outside of work, money, and work opportunity. Mm-hmm. So get two of the three. I think for me, I realized I loved everything. I loved the people and the culture and whatnot. But I think as a strategist, I was really restless. I realized that and this is something that I think a lot of strategists who come to Giant Spoon feel, is that you have so much more to offer beyond the creative brief. And I think that I wanted to go to a place where I could stretch a little bit more, understand the full scope of marketing. And that's something that the founders at Giant Spoon told me 7.5 years ago, or however long ago it was.
That's amazing.
We want to cultivate people who think like CMOs. Even if you aren't doing the full scope of things, you at least have insight into how marketing works, where's marketing shifting. And so by doing that, you become a better strategist because you understand what are the needs of all these different departments and how they work together.
Oh, that's really cool. So as strategy director, are you like supervisory over other strategists? How big is the group?
Yeah. So I want to say there's about 25 of us within the strategy department, which is pretty big for a small agency.
Yeah. How many creatives do y'all have?
Oh God, that's a good question. I don't know. I think it's like roughly around the same.
Okay.
But I think that it's the way we use strategists, and sometimes they say we're like the glue or filler sometimes because there's so many of us, and we'll get a project and we're almost attached to every single project. But depending on if another department has less people or bandwidth issues, we might have to stretch a little bit further outside of our strategy lane. And that's really exciting for us.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So what's the most rewarding or exciting phase or aspect of your job right now? Like what really fulfills you personally right now in your job?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think for me, I don't like to feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. And so right now, I love working with the other leadership members to figure out what's next. What's next for agency offerings? What's next for the types of marketing that we want to do? I think just in general, more agency level strategy. And then that trickles down into the actual work. But for me, that's always been really exciting is more figuring out kind of bigger picture. Where's this agency going?
Makes a lot of sense. All right. So awesome answers. And I've so enjoyed this conversation. I have two final questions for you. All right.
Yep.
First, what personal trait of yours, what is it about Nathalie Kahn that has served you best so far?
Ugh, probably being nosy.
Okay. Anything you would say after that is not the answer. That's the answer,
Well,
right?
I
So,
know.
so do
This
you
is
think
what I
it's, do
tell
you think you
people.
bother people?
I don't know if I'm bothering people, but I definitely think that my proactivity and taking initiative, for better or worse, has opened up doors for me. And I think that part of being nosy is just being aware of what's going on, micro and macro. So, for anyone who's listening and they're at all agency meetings, listen to the new business projects. Like when they list off, hey, here are clients we're going after, here are things that we're pursuing. If those interest you, like raise your hand, talk to your manager about doing those things. I think that I love talking with all the different departments. I love talking with our new business leads. I love talking with our operations team. And you learn a lot if you ask questions. And now I'm trying to do that for, as I'm managing different people, I always ask, like, what do you want? Like, make demands. And if I know that you want to lead an internship program, if you want to take ownership of a new business project, like I have that seed planted in my head. So when I'm in resourcing meetings, I'm like automatically thinking, hey, this person, told me that they would love to have an opportunity where they don't work directly under a director, but under a VP on a project. Like, let's make that happen.
I love that.
But like, you can't do that if you're just, thinking about your everyday work and kind of heads down and whatnot, which is also totally fine if you don't want to pursue that,
Absolutely.
But if you want to accelerate your career, like there are ways to do it.
So when you were in high school or college, did you have like a diverse set of friends? Meaning, like, did you have friends that were like jocks and stoners and all sorts of type? Could you talk to everybody? Did you have that?
That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, I went to a extremely diverse school in many different ways, like socioeconomic, racially, interest levels. And we were also really small for a public school. So I actually always joked that at our senior table, we had people who were like part of the International Baccalaureate. We had
My daughter was
the
that.
quarterback of the football team. We had people who were part of, the agriculture club. Like we weren't big enough to have so many silos.
That served you so well, though, right?
Yeah, and we all did crossword puzzles together at lunch. Like it was wonderful. I'm sure I'm like, creating a really idyllic picture of it, and I'm sure people were like, high school sucked, you were a bully. But to me, I had a really wonderful experience and I still talk with a lot of them. And, you have, I don't know, it was just something that it was very natural to me.
I think as a curious person, I feel like I come off as judgy and kind of difficult to get to, but it's because I really am wondering, like, what the heck? Like, let's have a conversation, right? You're judging because you're trying really hard to get past your judgment, right? You're trying to see the person and accept the person, right? In a way. And in high school, it's a little easier, or it's much harder. I don't know. But I saw that about you because your curiosity and your social flexibility, I think, is a really powerful thing. Obviously, being nosy is like what it looks like, but it's about like, wait a second, wait, what? Like, let's tell me what you want, tell me what's happening, whatever. It's really interesting. So knowing what you know now, if you could go back to the day you graduated and walked out of Chapman University, what would you whisper in young Nathalie's ear?
What would I whisper in my ear besides drinking more water? The forehead wrinkles, truly. If I had TikTok back then, I would know better.
This is funny. My wife said to me this morning, she said, like, we've been stuck in the house forever and she's trying to exercise, but she never does because she's so busy. She's got her own startup business. And she said, the only thing I'm doing well is water. So she started taking this giant jug of ice water up to her office and she like just gives herself water all day long. Okay. So what would you tell yourself? What do you wish you had known going into this journey?
Yeah, I think I would tell myself that it's good to take initiative. It's good to seize opportunities, but also understand what's valued. I think it's something that a lot of women go through where they're volunteered for things and presented as opportunities without taking work off their plate. And so I think in one way it's good because it might open doors. So I don't want to dismiss that. But at the same time, you can easily become just known as a very reliable person, and then people take advantage of it. So I think something that I would tell myself as well as other people who are entering the industry is, every time someone presents you with something, or if you're thinking about seizing it, asking yourself, like, is this something that I enjoy anyways? Like, do I find this fun? Like, sure, that's great. And there's a lot of things that are like that. And then I think secondly is like, is this something that can help my goals, help me reach my goals? And that's great. Is this something that they would have asked your male counterpart? And then, as you start doing these things, keep a list of all the things that you're doing. And when you go to a review, have that back pocket. This is something that I tell a lot of the strategists, because it's really hard sometimes as a manager to really understand the full extent of the contribution you're making. And so if you are in conversations where you do want to raise, or if you want to be considered for something, list out, okay, here are the things that I've done from a day-to-day client business. How have I made your life easier? Here's things that have maybe impacted the department. Here's things that might have impacted the agency, like being volunteered to be in a diversity and inclusion initiative. Like, there are things that are naturally put on your plate that I think people overlook. And so when you get to that point, you can have that list and say, here are things that I've done that I've uniquely contributed. Of these things, what are the most valued here? And I can focus my time on those things. I think if I look back on my career, I know that there are a lot of good opportunities, a lot of good things that have gotten me to where I am today. But I think I also struggle with a lot of things where I'm like, was I being taken advantage of? Like, is it because I'm just like an naturally take initiative type person, and so people just know that I will do it and get it done? And at the end of the day, like, this is a job. You should be compensated as such. You should have the same expectations put on you than other people. And so I think it's just good to be aware of those things, especially, as you're entering it, to make sure that you don't put yourself in a pattern that, can get you burnt out, or, makes you feel kind of like annoyed by the people around you.
What a gift for anyone that's stuck with this conversation long enough to hear that. That was really profound. And I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Listeners, I hope you got as much out of this as I did. This was awesome conversation with Nathalie Kahn. You can find her on the LinkedIn. It's like a professional social media sort of platform, linkedin.com. And she's also on Twitter at Nathalie Kahn, just like her name, one word after the @ sign. And she said, I heard her say years ago that she's pretty good at responding to DMs. So you can find her on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Find me as always at danspodcast@mac.com. If you're listening to this awkwardly on the website or something, it is on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts. You should probably know that by now. And I don't know why I say that on a podcast that you just listened to, but thank you for listening. Nathalie, thank you again so much for spending your morning with me and our listeners from your hotel room in Santa Monica. I hope that the construction job at your apartment happens smoothly. I hope that your pregnancy goes smoothly and comfortably. I wish you the best. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And listeners, we'll see you again really soon. Don't know when we're recording. Don't know when I'll be back, but I'll be back and see you then. Bye.